It's like living in a city where, if you own a flat, right, in that particular city, you become immediately vested. It doesn't make you a shareholder of the city, but it makes you vested in the success and the interest. If you open a business in that city, you are also immediately vested in its success. And you will do things not just for yourself, but for the community, because it improves the circumstances for everyone. But games today, or virtual worlds today, are generally feudal kingdoms. The benefits only accrue to the top. It only accrues to, the lords of it, right? The kings. And that means everyone who's serving them really is there at their pleasure. And if they don't like you, they kick you out. And so I think the main thing that changes as a result of this is that virtual goods existed in the past to support the game, because only the game can make money. But today with NFTs, I think games become a container of value and have to somewhat exist to support the value of the asset itself. So it's flipped upside down.
Layer 1 is a podcast and community dedicated to helping you master all things crypto. We'll be bringing you the best interviews with project executives, technical analysis for trading of the most popular cryptocurrencies, and insight into what's actually happening behind the scenes.
As you join us each episode, you're going to hear about tokens, fundraisers, investments, and even crypto conspiracies. But please remember that nothing we say should be considered financial or legal advice.
Come join us on this journey, and welcome to Layer 1.
All right, good morning, good evening, good night. It's another episode of Layer 1. We appreciate all the lads that have given us support over the past couple months. We've seen a huge influx into our community, so really shout out to you guys first. We have a great episode. The NFT guru, as I like to call him, Yatsui, is joining us. He is the co-founder of Animoca Brands, and they are certainly making headways in the NFT space. And we've got such a fascinating discussion, but I want to get Yat and bring him in now. What's going on, Yat?
Well, thank you. It feels like ages since we last spoke about this, but a pleasure to be here. So first of all, I guess a lot has happened since we last spoke, and this was maybe only just a matter of months, but first of all, Sandbox, which is basically the SAND token and the one that's selling land, has listed on Binance originally, and now is listed on many, many exchanges. So that's really sort of been phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, when we actually did the SAND listing in August, it was sort of the beginning of a movement where people were really starting to get excited again about IEOs. And then the topic of NFTs was still sort of interesting, but exploratory. Most people were like, oh, that's interesting. Didn't know what that's doing. And what we discovered in the SAND listing, which I think sort of led the way a little bit, is that we brought on another 115 to 120,000 people who had never heard about Sandbox, but ended up sort of owning the SAND token. And that ended up getting them interested in the project and NFTs. And then they started buying land. And so the project since then has sold more land, and that sold out really, really well as well. Sold out usually within minutes. And so that's one, right? And then of course, somewhere in between, we also had an IPO. So we listed our health and fitness business called All of X. And we also went ahead after the whole Uniswap craze went up and everyone was like talking about decentralized listings. We decided to take our sort of Formula One project with REVV Motorsports, you see the cars right behind me, essentially decided to go that approach as a faster route and as one that we can offer value to our players. And that was phenomenal as well with the token listing first on Uniswap. And then what was also interesting is that after it was listed, many centralized exchanges were like, oh, would you like to list with us? It was a reverse approach, right? Because one thing that people probably don't appreciate at this point, because it's so long ago, is, listing the Binance way is a long process, right? It's due diligence, it's work, and it's all fair, it's all necessary, right? And we did the same with REV, we did the legal opinions, we had it all done. But, listing on something like Uniswap is just go, right? Mm-hmm. And it's no longer having a sort of central authority that sort of guides and becomes a gatekeeper. The gatekeepers are really the ones who buy the token. You literally vote with your wallet. Do you like it? Don't you like it? And how do you approach that? So it's a completely new world. And the decentralized exchanges are actually disrupting the centralized ones. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen that a ton in DeFi, and the centralized exchange owners and teams are really struggling to kind of keep up, and they're scrambling to list all these decentralized exchange tokens. And it's a fascinating time. We were talking about pre-episode how we had you on the interview. I think it was like 3 months ago, but you've had so many things happen since then. So this is what we're gonna do. I've kind of propped you up as this NFT guru to our community. Not that I needed to. You are that. So we'll start generally, kind of around what we've seen on the timeline, because again, you said the last time we were on, NFTs, I think to the broader crypto community just weren't interesting. And now what we've seen over the past week to a month, we've seen the broader crypto community kind of come in. So let's start with the general timeline and what you kind of see there, and then we'll make our way into the specific projects that you guys are working with now. So
yeah, no problem. Yeah, sure. So first of all, I mean, I think when we first spoke, we were still in the evangelizing phase of NFTs, right? We were basically really just talking about what NFTs are. And what's interesting is that, in the past, we had spent a lot of time trying to communicate the value of NFTs to traditional gamers. And then we sort of shifted gears a little bit because we realized there were only like 150,000 wallets that ended up owning NFTs out of 40 to 50 million wallets who had crypto. So why don't we sort of change that a little bit and bring the narrative in? And the token in itself is that way of doing it, because most of the crypto community understands a fungible token, but they don't quite understand a non-fungible token, right? They've heard of CryptoKitties, that's interesting, maybe of F1, maybe of Sandbox, but broadly speaking, it's a niche product for niche applications. So that's all changed, right? And everyone seems to have an opinion, it's good, it's bad, it's whatever it is. The sort of term NFT has sort of become much more mainstream. And I would say in the crypto community has now really hit probably late early majority, and we're probably getting to sort of it's early early adopter and moving into the early majority stage. So we haven't quite hit sort of this fat saturation space, but everyone has now heard of it, and there's always more and more influential people talking about it. And it's also fascinating because, and also somewhat sort of encouraging, because many of the things that we have been preaching about, now other people are saying, hey, this is a thing, right? This makes sense. NFTs have value, all that stuff. And it's a sense of vindication a little bit, but also a sense of knowledge that we're actually not really that crazy. So we did have an idea that seemed to be sensible. And of course, the other thing that has come about is that there's a rise of social tokens as well, where NFTs and personalities are identified, right? So you can see that as well, right? Whether it's in the form of coin artist or whether you see it as this whale, right? And what's interesting, for instance, in the case of whale, is that a good chunk, I think I read in a report, maybe half of his estate is actually Sandbox land, right? And he, makes valuable and important investment decisions, and then essentially people buy the whale token, as a form of that asset. Now, we're very honored that he bought Sandbox land, and that a big chunk of it brings that value. But that again brings an interesting question, which is, well, wait, so all the people that are buying into your NFTs of a virtual project in and of itself, which now has an additional value. And of course, the next step is now people are looking at lending products, and other ones are fractionalizing NFTs and sort of listing the tokens in and of itself, right? It's, venture capitalists are buying NFTs for, lots of money. When we sold the 111 car, Formula One, it was considered very controversial because everyone's like, nobody would ever spend 415 ETH on a car. Nobody's talking about that right now, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what? Just 400 ETH, right? it's a completely conversation, right? So it wasn't so crazy after all.
It's interesting that you bring up social tokens, especially whale, because in the way that you form that, it's almost like someone could get exposure to NFTs by holding whale. So they're buying a social token to get exposure to NFTs. So for someone that's uninitiated, right, we have these people coming in, which is a whole nother topic that I want to get to. I want you to kind of get back at the detractors here on the episode. But for someone that's just finding about NFTs, I think you do a wonderful job of explaining the kind of value prop. So kind of just giving your elevator pitch, if someone's just hearing about NFTs for the first time and wants to get involved, what is the value prop for NFTs?
Right. So I think one of the big benefits of a non-fungible token is that it is able to have permanence of really an object that may in itself not have value, but stores with it, because of its permanence, aspects of value that are deeply human to us, right? So memories is a great example of this, right? When you think of family heirlooms, or when you think of things that matter to you, they are in fact permanent, tangible items that actually cannot, something you collect and you have a connection with, right? And the problem about the digital world in the past, especially with games and so on, is that they actually were not they were centralized, so they would just disappear, and they would literally just be memories in your brain. But now, basically, with the non-fungible token, using the same technology that allows for these fungible tokens like Bitcoin to be permanent, you can use that same approach to make sort of non-fungible, scarce, unique items. And by scarce, we don't necessarily mean that each of them has to be uniquely different in their design, right? That's one application, like you see in art. It could also mean that there could be 1 million of the same items, but then because of the journey that that item has taken, it becomes unique and special. Like Roger Federer's tennis racket is more valuable, even though everyone can buy that, right? Or like that cup that I might be using for myself, and then, you know, my kids used it, or maybe Taylor Swift owned it, or maybe Michael Jackson put an autograph on it, right? It's still a cup, but it ends up having new additional sentimental value to us, right? And for myself, as someone who's been in the games industry pretty much since forever, you know, I would love to be able to pass on my virtual goods to my children, right? Even if just as a memory. It's no different than, you know, wedding heirlooms or family heirlooms, something that you pass down. And now the digital world has this. And I think for anyone who's played games and spent hours and hours in them, they appreciate the fact that there's something permanent they want to keep with them, even if the asset themselves may no longer have a particular utility. But with, you know, the other thing that's beautiful here is it may not have a utility in this world, but you could take it somewhere else. And I think the big thing that we believe that non-fungible tokens will actually really revolutionize, and you can see this already in the early stages with artists creating it, is that in this, this technology makes it possible to create content that will then be imported into other universes. So we believe that NFTs will be responsible for a content revolution where content becomes the platform itself. Today, right, if I want to find games or movies or music, I go to a centralized place to find that content. The creator typically has to work with a centralized agency, has to trust that they do the right thing, and they become the gatekeepers of this. In the future, I think that the content is going to be distributed and explored in different universes because of the fact that they exist in 20 different places because the user owns them. We have this in the real world already. Buy a pair of Nike shoes. I don't use them in a Nike stadium only. I actually get to use them everywhere. I can use them in my home. I can use it outside. I can play basketball with it. I can play tennis with it. And everyone can see it's a Nike shoe. And hey, that's kind of a cool shoe. Maybe I'd like to have that, right? And actually, imagine if the whole world was in fact centralized by a single agency. I mean, games today is, you know, like a big game like League of Legends, right? It's the NBA, it's ESPN, it's a sport of basketball, right? All in one, and it's Nike, everything in one, right? One organization controls everything. And we know that sort of monopolistic and sort of kingdom-like behavior can't scale, and that's exactly what's happening with games. There's a lot of value there, but if you actually opened it up, where someone else could build the Nike of the digital world, and then you'd have the media side, and then you'd also have the sport itself, and then of course you have the organization. All of them have different interests, but they all come together because you have a larger community that have a vested interest in the success. And I think NFTs enable that. And we're seeing that movement with artists, but I think broadly speaking, you know, the big movement will be when you have, you know, like the Puma or the Nike or the Adidas of NFTs come about, and games will use them inside their ecosystems. I think that this will be a fascinating time.
When you talk about kind of vested in the success, what NFTs kind of allow in these games is to open up that value proposition. I'd love for you to talk about kind of having a stake in these games now as opposed to before.
So the mantra that we've been preaching earlier for the uninitiated was to say we're delivering property rights for gamers, right? Because in a way that's something that people didn't understand before. What context is that? Because maybe I'm buying a virtual asset and I kind of think I own it, but in reality I don't, right? I'm really renting it. When you actually give someone property rights, you actually have the ability to own it and do whatever you want with it, whether you want to sell it, loan it, use it somewhere else. That is your right. And also, because it's yours, it's a symbol to you as well. If it's like a Formula One car that's really expensive, then people know that you might have money, or it's a social status. These are things that you can now illustrate through the use of such an NFT. And I think that this is something that for players themselves, now that they can own this asset, means that they're not necessarily shareholders in the company, because that's really the only way in which you can, in the past, have a participation in the actual sort of in a game. But now by owning assets in it, you are effectively a stakeholder and have as much a vested interest. It's like living in a city where, you know, if you own a flat, right, in that particular city, you become immediately vested. It doesn't make you a shareholder of the city, but it makes you vested in the success and the interest. If you open a business in that city, you are also immediately vested in its success. And you will do things not just for yourself, but for the community, because it improves the circumstances for everyone. But games today, or virtual worlds today, are generally feudal kingdoms. The benefits only accrue to the top. It only accrues to, you know, the lords of it, right? The kings. And that means everyone who's serving them really is there at their pleasure. And if they don't like you, they kick you out. They can take away your assets, as we've seen many times before. They can change the rules on you. And, you know, the example I give here, it's a little bit like living in North Korea or maybe Venezuela. It's fun up to a point, and then you go, you know what, that's not it. And what happens then is people leave. And one of the challenges with games is that right now you're playing games for social status, you're playing games for, you know, social connection, but you have no value. You have no real vested interest beyond that. And that means once you leave, actually, you have no reason to come back to it. And I think and so people talk about non-fungible tokens like in the crypto context of, oh, but it's valuable, it makes you money, that's where you come back. Maybe, somewhat. But actually, the asset itself is sentimental, right? So I can take my sword, and it's there forever. And because it doesn't take a lot of storage, I can use that sword, you know, forever and keep it there. And it's a memory. It's like a photo, except it somehow feels real because I can use it elsewhere. And so I take that sword with me wherever, even if I can't use it, for my achievements in a game like Ultima Online 20 years ago, or World of Warcraft, or those moments. That's my thing I can take with me. The added benefit here is that if you had these assets and items, you can actually then have other studios take advantage of it. Imagine if, you know, people who used to play Ultima Online could have their assets be reworked in another game. How many of those old users would at least just try out the game? It's a great user acquisition, but it's also hugely valuable to the player. And so I think the main thing that changes as a result of this is that virtual goods existed in the past to support the game, because only the game can make money. But today with NFTs, I think games become a container of value and have to somewhat exist to support the value of the asset itself. So it's flipped upside down.
Guys, that was an amazing, like I told the community, if you want to know about NFTs, that's the whole clip that I'm going to use for someone that's uninitiated. So we've got these people coming in from the broader crypto community. They're saying these NFT assets have zero value because they can be copied. And I think you do have to kind of separate maybe gaming NFTs to maybe NFT art, because there potentially is a utility with gaming NFTs. You can actually use that in the game. Whereas art, I think it comes up to this philosophical debate of what is value. So what would you say to these people that are talking copy and paste and all these kind of situations and these debates? What do you say to people that kind of make the argument that NFTs are essentially valueless and can be copy and pasted?
I mean, let's take away the element of NFT first, right? And just talk about originals versus copies, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if someone bought a fake Rolex, does he actually like the idea of wearing a fake Rolex, right? Is he saying, hey, cool, I got a fake Rolex, this is awesome, let me tell the whole world about it? Or is he actually buying a fake Rolex because he thinks he wants to be someone or be in a social rank somewhere, but actually not really sort of expose that, right? Very few people sort of show off the fact that they bought a sort of forgery for many reasons, not just because it doesn't look cool or because it seems sort of like theft or something, but also because it's just something that sort of makes it's embarrassing, right? And I think that's the thing which is now when you talk about the copy paste culture, if you've been indoctrinated so long in the world of the internet, everyone thinks like, I can just make a copy. And I understand that. It's, however, no different than saying, look, I can look at the original Picasso in a museum, and then I can buy a photo print, right? That's one way to think of it. But then they also have this thing where you can make a lithographic copy, which is signed by the original artist, and those go for thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Especially the Picasso ones. So why is that valuable, right? And I go back to this thing about sentimentality and the perspective. You know, the material that the Picasso is made on, even the lithographic copies, is not very valuable, right? It's paper, brush, pen, whatever, right? But the fact that it's from Picasso, whether it's because he has value, whether it's a memory for his background, whether it's something you recall, that gives it value. Art, talking just about art for a moment, is not something that needs to be appreciated by the masses. It never was, right? Auction houses like Christie and Sotheby's do not have 1 million people bidding. It's a small community of, you know, a discerning audience that cares about this stuff, who pay millions, tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars for these special pieces of art because they appreciate it. And at the end of the day, it only needs two, right? When they bid for it, you only need two people who really want it, and that gives it value. Nobody said art was highly liquid, right?
Yeah.
And that was not, and that's not the role of art, right? It's valuable to a community of people. If it happens to be valuable to a group of people that have a ton of cash, it just becomes more valuable, right? So that's it's no different than a marketplace mentality, right? If someone wants to buy my shares, if someone wants to buy my tokens, if someone wants to buy my Bitcoin, that is the same thing. Someone out there said that Bitcoin's worth 10,000 and another person said it's worth 11,000. Let's trade, right? And when the community was very small, Bitcoin was worth very little. And when the community became larger and the demand was larger, then Bitcoin became more valuable. Our art works kind of the same way. The difference here is that its non-fungibility, because of its uniqueness, means that every piece of art has a different value. And I think that's where it seems, you know, if you're thinking from a trading mentality, you might have difficulties with this because you go, well, how can I compare it? The whole point is you can't, right? It's either something special to you or it's special to others. So that means just like you have in the real world, you know, who you buy art from, what's the background, what's the history, becomes important. And it's fascinating now, of course, because there's new personas that are coming out that are basically issuing this art, which has no particular purpose, but maybe means something to the person who buys it. Now, I think when it comes to crypto in particular, having the original is very special because you instantly know whether it's fake or not, right? Because the provenance is something you just check out, whether it's the wallet it comes from or whether it's a signature that's there, you know whether it's a real one or not, and you can track that. And I think that makes a big difference. What I also believe in the future is eventually, just like in the early days of the internet, there's a lot of copy-paste NFTs that are out there. So you've got to be careful because they're just minting an NFT of something. And I see a lot of copyrighted materials that are out there that are being made and people don't know about it. And they just buy the tokens because it looks cool, but actually it wasn't done by them. That is the problem that the internet had before, right? And still has, because people just make a copy. And then, you know, copyright law came and they tried to stop that. The thing about now with NFTs is actually, you know, the source. So if I look at the NFT, I can say, I definitely did not authorize this. And what I do believe will happen, especially in marketplaces, is that there's going to be a time when the industry catches up where they're going to say, that is copyright infringement, please take it down. That doesn't mean that the NFT can't exist. It does mean that the NFT will no longer be able to be sold in certain marketplaces. And because of blockchain, they can be taken down much easier than they could before when they were copy-paste or just videos, right? Right now, it only works in centralized platforms. Like if I post an infringing video on YouTube, YouTube will take me down, right? But now with blockchain, that infringement sort of running after the guy is automatic. It's like, I know this is wrong, right? And any platform that enables this, I go after you, right? So actually, I think, you know, NFTs is actually a boom for copyright protection, for artist protection, for the protection of the history and the provenance. So that means that piracy, as the market matures, definitely becomes less possible. So that's generally healthy, right? And then the other one, of course, is that if someone just copies a piece of art and it wasn't trademarked or something, everyone will know whether it's an original or not because they know who the originating author is because they look at the wallet. what's missing now is that there's no simple way of doing it. It's not like I can easily look at it and easily tells me the information. That's just maturity, right? Eventually, when you play a virtual world and you put up your art, you know, whether it says fake or not, or whether it says from this artist or not, it's there.
Yeah.
The point is the data is there. You can't remove that. And, you know, people will always value the original. And when you go into someone's home and you see an original Picasso, you go, wow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you see, you know, a poster, you just kind of look at it. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting because we had a discussion, I believe, a month ago. It was like a month after our original interview, and we discussed kind of these NFT features and kind of the emergent features that are happening, specifically around like metadata. But like all the things you're talking about, no one goes into somebody's house and like makes sure to check that that's a real painting, right? Or no one's in the Louvre checking the back. They're always kind of going around a third party and trusting that third party that is actually,
Right.
you know, which is just an interesting discussion. All right, so as far as liquidity and exchanges, I think that's a huge friction point for kind of the NFT industry in general. I think it's harder to buy and sell and trade NFTs than it would be just trading regular cryptocurrency tokens. What do you think we need to do to kind of solve this barrier that is kind of liquidity within NFTs? I know you guys partner with Crypto Locally. I don't know if that's some type of thing that you guys are moving into, but how do we solve this issue of liquidity within NFTs?
Well, I mean, I think one of the important things to determine here is liquidity for NFTs is important, of course, for utility and value, but is it really important that every NFT must have lots of liquidity? And I don't think so, right? Because, you know, because again, it's something that might mean only for a small community of people, right? You know, an NFT could just be a valuable memory. It doesn't always have to be something about becoming worth lots of money, right? But I mean, I understand that that's, you know, a crypto rationale. It's like, is it making money? If not interested, right? So I think there's that part, but you need both because if you don't have that, then actually the sense and purpose. Actually, what I really like about NFTs, it actually is an importer of permanent culture of something, right? Which actually I think allows it to give crypto a human flavor, a more empathetic flavor, a more natural flavor, right? When you talk about just fungible tokens, you are automatically shifting towards an audience that is looking at trading and selling clearly, right? And that's crypto world today. And, you know, it's like when we did Formula One, one of the comments I was giving internally, I was like, it's like making games for bankers, right? Because it's a high value, high stakes type of gameplay because everything's expensive, you know, and since we started the token, you know, our sort of epic cars, for instance, went from less than 1 ETH to worth to 4 ETH. That's a lot of money, right? I mean, you can't imagine that in a normal gaming environment. Right?
It is interesting that you point that out because a lot, like I think Kane and a couple other big players within the DeFi industry were calling DeFi an MMORPG. Like they were calling it physically a game.
That's right. And it is, you know, in some ways, just like life, you could say, argue is a kind of game as well, right? So I think that's one of the things that's happening here in this space. And I think what you're seeing with your point on DeFi is a lot of gamification elements came into finance. But what we're now actually, frankly, all about is actually introducing finance into games. And I think that in itself is a really cool area to explore.
Yeah, let's touch on this because I think the launch of meme really kind of catalyzed the whole industry. It brought DeFi guys into what you were talking about with it being a non-fungible token and something that's unique as opposed to kind of playing this game with a fungible token that's just simply just a medium of exchange or some sort of value, you know. So let's talk about the non-fungible assets as it comes to DeFi and these kind of synergy of both, right? I know you guys are doing something with F1 where you can stake to receive more of assets in game. Can you break that down?
Yeah, so I mean, so the way that we're designing, for instance, the F1 Delta Time project is really around a rental economy. Because what we realized when we didn't know where the prices were going to land. But once we realized that actually the cars were selling for the prices that they are, we certainly realized that for regular players, this might not be attainable. Enter DeFi, because that basically means that you can take the cars and you can stake them. What it means is you're actually renting it back to us. We're basically like a Hertz, right? And then the cars go back into the stable. And then other players in the next iteration will be able to rent those cars for a fee and drive them for the winning prizes in the races and the time trial. And I think this is where it's interesting now, because it means that as an original owner, I get rewarded for passive income, right? Because I'm renting it out. But for those who wish to take an active participation and drive the cars, they can make income as well, right? And there's a cycle that basically flows around. So that gives it some value, because of course we get paid rental income, which then in turn allows for the owner of the car to get a part of it back, right? So that's an example of DeFi there. The launch of a token for a community is a form of DeFi as well, right? Because now I have a financial product in some form or fashion where the virtual currency inside the game has financial value because there's friction for people who can buy it from outside for purposes of holding or investments. And of course, now I have all the rage is around liquidity mining and staking, around, I'm staking this and I'm getting X and I'm doing that, right? Really as a mechanism to lock up liquidity, which I think is a very interesting mechanic and one definitely that makes sense, but I think needs to also be one that's designed carefully, because there is a point where you can only pay so much. So your utility is important. It's fine for the first few months, right? But if you're paying essentially these incredible interest rates, right, for your yield results over a period of, 6 months or a year, actually you have a different kind of inflation that takes place, right? And that's the race as well. So you have to put as much more utility to it. Enter things like NFTs, right? I mean, everyone kind of knows the background on meme. It wasn't necessarily something that was considered to be necessarily too serious. And now because serious money started getting involved, it was like, oh man, we need to do something. And so enter NFT farming, right? Which I think is brilliant.
It is.
But I think the thing is now, what are you farming and what's the purpose? And, I think here it's again, if you know that you're farming something valuable, then it's worth holding up the tokens. But if you're really farming stuff that maybe is considered valueless, or because there's not enough of a community who wants it. And again, the important thing is who wants it, right? It's not necessarily that you have to give something that gives you cash return. It just has to be something that's desirable, right? It's like, secondhand Nike sneakers. God knows why they're necessarily valuable, but they are, right? And as a result, if I am able to get that, there's desire and people will do something for that. And so I think people are using NFTs as that mechanism to say, here's something scarce, here's something unique you can't get otherwise. Go for it.
Yeah, I think
the only way to do it is this way.
I think it's important that we harp on this, because before, when you had this farming mechanic, you were staking yam to get sushi and all these different fungible tokens, and now you can stake meme to get a non-fungible art piece, and it just flips it on its head a little bit. So as far as like the actual mechanic of F1, I'm staking the cars, specifically the NFT itself, to then get, what am I yielding from that?
So what happens is that you stake the car and then you get essentially a yield back in REV, and there's a staking report that tells you how much you're getting back. And actually, if you go on Twitter, you'll find some people posting about their results and actually earning a reasonable income from that. And of course, as I said earlier, those cars then go into our pool. So actually it goes into our contract for the duration of that stake. So that means they can't race the car anymore. It also means they can't sell the car on OpenSea or another marketplace, because it's no longer, at least on contract, theirs. Then they can withdraw the car. They can also break the contract and say, you know what, someone wants to buy this car for a lot of money. I'm going to break the contract and basically not continue staking anymore and just sell the car. But you have to pick, right? And I think part of this mechanism, what it ended up doing is the reverse of what people are talking about tokens. It took cars out of supply, right? And so as a result, epic cars that were sort of sold for maybe less than 1 ETH basically went up to 3 or 4 ETH, or maybe even more. If you look at the OpenSea marketplace, you just won't see that many epic cars left anymore, and maybe no legendary cars to buy. So it may reduce the trading of the cars in itself, but it raised the value for them as a whole. And actually, if you're the owner of the car, that's probably more what you want than necessarily just the fact that tons of people are trading them, which is different from a token, right? A fungible token wants the trade, because if you have no liquidity in that, then it's valueless. No matter what the value is, if nobody will trade with you, you don't have, then there's no point, right? So I think that's some of the nuances that are different. And it was an experiment, but I think it's turning out to be a really interesting one. And I think a number of other companies will figure other ways of doing that. We'll also be doing our own, essentially, sort of rev staking approach as well, which will be announced very soon. And what we're doing here is that you can stake basically to have bigger winnings, for instance, inside the game. So that's another form of financial element. You still get your stake back, but if you stake more, instead of necessarily just having yield, you have to work for it in the race. And I think that's an important element here, because you want people who participate in your ecosystem to do something, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want them to just have passive income. That's fine too, but you should be rewarded for being an active player, because that helps drive community and helps give really more utility to the cars.
It's an amazing kind of event that we're seeing arise as we continue going through DeFi and NFTs and kind of the synergy of both. One of the best models that I saw, or at least the one that got my attention with F1, was the ability to actually buy the actual track and not the car, and then take in passive income from people racing on that track. Is that something you guys are still doing? Because that's something that jumped off the page to me.
Yes. So track sales are going to happen soon. So I guess for anyone who's interested in that, hold on to your rev, or if you think rev will be cheaper, then buy it later. Up to you. I mean, that's the other part, right? That's the other mechanism here as well. You can, because right now, basically everything we're doing now, we're doing it on rev. So the pricing of that depends entirely on where you think the price will be. So people can either hold or sell or buy or whatever, right? So that's all part of the game, and we will do that. It's interesting also because that narrative, the human narrative of owning land, has been probably the most lucrative one when it comes to the NFT space, because people intrinsically understand it. So tracks are the same. People are like, oh, I understand tracks. There's only so many of them. You race on them. You got to pay for that. Okay, I get it, right? It's not surprising, but still fascinating how people apply sort of real world thinking into all the virtual stuff as well. And that the things that sell best seem to be the ones that have the closest connection to the real world. So ultimately, we're not that detached.
Yeah, speaking of virtual real estate, let's touch on the Sandbox here. Obviously, there's been a ton of sales. Everyone is kind of eagerly awaiting the launch of the Metaverse. I think it's going to be it is one of the main competitors to Decentraland. I think it could eventually surpass Decentraland there. I want to get your take on kind of the Metaverse situation as we see it in blockchain today. Currently, it's super rudimentary, at least to my thought process. So,
well, I mean, look, yeah. So first of all, most of the virtual worlds that are out there are early stages or are being built, and it's some fascinating stuff with the Sandbox. So you see, like Decentraland. I think there's a CryptoVox. I mean, there's a lot of things that people are building. But I actually think they all build the ecosystem together. And in particular, I had mentioned this earlier, we're big believers in interoperability, right? And the great belief that people can actually sort of take an asset from one world and move it to another, and that they basically all play nice, is actually a way to enhance that space. I don't believe, and I don't want the metaverse to be one kingdom. Mm-hmm. I don't want one company to run and control it, no matter how decentralized it is in and of itself. I find the thing that's beautiful about it is that you have multiple places you can be, and you can be in the world that fits you best, right? And I think this is the thing about the virtual space, that actually you're not limited by the scarcity of the physical, right? You can design scarcity for something to make it valuable, but actually it's not physically scarce in that sense. If I want to move to another planet or another world that suits me better, I can be there and connect with people that are of like mind, where I feel good about things, right? And in a sense, the sort of token communities have that, because token communities, whether they're Ethereum or whether it's Tron or whether it's EOS, right? They all have a sort of Harmony, right? Or Hedera. All of them have particular flavors of their character that people are drawn to and become fans of, right? So that's, I see that the same with the metaverse. And I actually am really hoping that the metaverse will be this globally interconnected world where you have those NFTs as your assets, where you can own and travel them, travel around and use them wherever you want, right? And not one world, but like hopefully thousands and thousands of them. And I think that to me is what would be truly exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited to see all the IPs coming to the Sandbox. Can we get a date on maybe, I know it's in like an alpha mode, beta. I don't know if it's alpha or beta, but I know it's in that mode. Can we get maybe a launch date from you today?
Well, I think the general narrative, and of course, Seb and Artur will probably sort of kill me if I make any predictions on this, since they're really the ones driving the project. But I would say, generally the game maker is due to be launched at the end of the year.
Okay.
So look out for that, right?
Got it. Okay. Well, interoperability was kind of brought up there. Obviously, you guys announced recently that you're bringing Flow or I believe Stargirl, F1 Delta, and MotoGP to the Flow blockchain. I
Right.
know Sandbox is on Ethereum. What is the situation there? Is this going to be a potential migration of maybe all the IPs to Flow, or is this going to work on both blockchains? How is that going to look?
So my general view has always been, first of all, Flow is a great project. And as you know, we've been early sort of adopters and investors in Dapper Labs. So we very much support what they do. That said, we don't, again, believe that it is a sort of single token world. There are many benefits and advantages for some sort of a protocol like Flow, particularly if you consider what's happened with gas prices recently, thanks to DeFi. It doesn't make it easy for someone who just wants to trade sort of or play games, for instance, on chain. It's just not feasible when every transaction is like $15, right? It just becomes difficult. That said, Ethereum plays a very valuable role as a custodian of high value items. And I think I've shared this before. I think to me, it's more like if you want to have something that's safe, then you put that on Ethereum. And if it's something a little less valuable, you can put that on another chain for faster access and lower cost. And there's multiple solutions out there that address this. So we like what Flow is doing, but you shouldn't expect that we're going to be doing things exclusively, because exclusive means we're excluding, right? And we don't like that, right? It kind of goes against what we think is the sort of blockchain and NFT interoperability ethos. And part of the arrangement, if you look at the announcement, is that there's going to be an ETH bridge, meaning that you can transfer items in and out of Ethereum, both the fungible token as well as the non-fungible one. And I think that's very, very important, because one of the challenges we have where sort of protocols don't talk to each other is because they exclude each other. And then they start building walls. In a sense, they are a decentralized, same thing. They're a decentralized community within a wall, right? So, but when you start having actually these bridges, you're actually creating free trade. And actually, I actually think when you do that, you make the network both more resilient and more honest, right? Because if I have the ability to travel from one place to another, I need to do what's best for you to keep you. That's in a way what a democratic institution is about. If I actually have a way of locking you in, indirectly, I have ways of abusing it now because you can't leave, right? Which, in a much more centralized structure like a game is happening all the time. But in even a closed, in a blockchain that's sort of closed, you can run the rules. And I can't, I might say, you know what, I don't like this, so I move. The problem is, if it's locked, who's going to buy it, right? It's just still within. So I have to liquidate first before I leave. But if I could move it to another area, that to me is really interesting, and maybe the foundations for a really, really interesting, perhaps more equitable future.
Interesting. All right. So I've got a relevant community question here. We were coming up to the end of the episode, so I do want to hop out, but if you have anything left to touch on with F1, we'll get to it after this question. We've got Scott Firestone asking, does he think that it's important for current name brand gaming companies to adopt NFTs, or is it more important for up and coming companies to start the trend? And I think it's relevant because of what you're talking about with the open worlds. I think a lot of AAA companies, a lot of bigger entities, they want their fiefdom. They've built up a large kingdom, and I think that they are a little bit averse to it. So what's it going to take for companies like that to get in?
Well, I have never known of an emperor willingly giving up his kingdom. At least historically, I can't think of too many examples. Maybe there's a few, but they're hard to find, and for good reason. The benefits are too much. It's not that they necessarily have more wealth because of it, but they have power, right? And giving up that power is difficult. And that's what you're seeing with game companies today as well. Plus, you have the classic innovator's dilemma. If they actually are going to disrupt their business this way, they risk potentially billions of dollars. I mean, take a company like Epic, right? they make $4 or $5 billion literally selling skins in a centralized ecosystem. Why would you give that up? And if you did, you have to assume that you have to introduce scarcity and that the trade of these items must be multiples of that in order to generate the same revenue, say $30 or $40 billion worth of skin trades to get the same kind of revenue. That's unnecessary disruption. So there's no reason for them to do that. But we've seen the same with mobile games, right? I mean, how many of the large companies in 2010, 2011 said, oh my goodness, look at the Apple iPhone. That's going to change gaming. Let's all go in. It took them about 5 or 6 years before that actually took place, and was really sort of the hallmark event of that was when Activision bought King.com, the makers of Candy Crush, for I think it was $6 billion. That's when it was like, okay, mobile games is serious. We got to do it, right? But it took them 6 years. And it took that time for the industry to get to a point where everyone looked at it. Because of course, from a business model standpoint, mobile games seems like a bad idea. Wait, am I going to now sell a game that is free or $1.99 for something I used to be able to pay $40 or $50? So I think the same will happen here. The incumbents are not going to move on this quickly. There's also too much risk for them, which is the opportunity for smaller and younger companies like ourselves and others to emerge into space. And, Supercell or Rovio, those companies did not exist before, right? And in fact, before mobile games, even companies like Tencent weren't really a big force, right? They became big because of mobile. They became big because of WeChat. I mean, they were already large, but really their dominance came for the mobile side of things. So in comparison to the large companies at the time, like an EA or an Activision. And of course, today, Tencent is way larger than those guys, right? So I think that cycle will continue. And frankly, that's exciting as well because, everyone gets a chance.
Yeah, I think the fee structure of attaching a percentage fee to the secondary market sales is a big selling point. I think if someone can point that out to these people that when they sell that LeBron James jersey now, and then someone else sells it, they're not getting a cut there. But if if it changes hands 10 times, they're getting a cut of that. I think the secondary market sales and them attaching a fee via blockchain is a big sell for them.
It is, but I think one of the big challenges from the IP holders as well, and so we work with a lot of IP, right? We have over 300 IPs in our stable, and a good chunk of them have already agreed to do sort of blockchain stuff, which is great. But it also means that you have to start getting comfortable with assets that are permanent, right? Normally, when you license an IP, you have a 2 or 3 year license and it expires, game goes away or digital asset goes away. Here, like our Formula One cars, even if we no longer produce Formula One cars, after the end of our license, every car that was minted is permanent. It's there, it's yours. Mm-hmm. And not all license holders are comfortable with this at the moment because they don't fully appreciate that, which is why they haven't all onboarded onto it. But to your point, once they realize and understand that there's a permanent revenue stream, even on the secondary sales, which might be worth more than the primary sales over time, mm-hmm. They might say, that's a great idea. We should do that. And I think that will come maybe sooner than we expect.
Yeah, I'm just ignorant here. Why would they not be okay with the IP expire or the IP never expiring?
Classically speaking, it's because in the industry, people charge a license fee, and upfront for a license. And if the IP is very successful, the historical business model was the leverage to charge more, right? So if we do extremely well with F1, it allows the opportunity for someone else to come in and say, I'll buy the license because it's really successful. I'll pay you 5 times as much. And, obviously the IP owner benefits. Of course, in this model, because the constant revenue stream increases and therefore their commissions increases, they would benefit as well, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, it's a little bit like, selling a future that hasn't really quite realized. And therefore, people aren't doing this yet and are sort of hesitating around this because, after all, it's disrupting an existing business model, right? It's all about getting comfortable with something. I mean, we are still educating people about sort of, NFTs, right? Mm-hmm. We're still early in this stage.
Got it. All right. Well, we're running up to the end of the episode. If you do have anything else to tell us about F1 REVV Token, please do so now. Is there anything that you didn't touch on?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the big things that we're looking to, of course, MotoGP is coming out soon. And, we have some pretty exciting news. So stay tuned, listening to what Rev is offering, because we have a number of new brands that are going to come on board into the Rev ecosystem. I think that's going to be exciting. And actually within tomorrow, we will be announcing basically the sort of Rev staking product and how you can basically utilize that. So I think as an experiment in generating more playtime through a staking approach, come check it out tomorrow when it's there.
100%. All right. I appreciate
Thank
you
you.
coming on the channel, Yacht. This has been an amazing discussion. I have one last question for you. When I was doing my research beforehand, I like to get into YouTube and watch recent videos and see what you're up to. But I did come across an old video. You're in 2007 at the Zeitgeist conference.
Oh,
and I want,
the Google one.
yes. And I want to just get this question out there. What would you tell younger Yacht in 2007? What would you go back and tell him today if you could?
Well, I mean, in the context of Zeitgeist or just in general?
I don't know much about Zeitgeist, so more in general, and it kind of about the game. Your speech was about gaming and this stuff. So what would you tell him about gaming?
Well, I mean, first of all, I remember one of the big things I was talking about in the Zeitgeist conference in 2007 was about the power of Hello Kitty, which was one of the main IPs that we had. And actually, I think also the entrance of Asia our Asian IP as a force. So back then, Asian IP wasn't probably, or anime or those characters were not really a big thing. Of course, now it's everywhere, sort of setting a trend. And one of the things when I go back, like I was always a believer in sort of the power of youth because they were trendsetters, right? Or let's call it young people who saw a trend because they were not shackled with sort of existing systems that were in, right? If you're used to doing something for decades, then something new comes in, actually sort of intrinsically, you may not want to do it. Whereas, generally if you're younger, you do that. So when you look at young people, like even when I look at my own kids, that's how sometimes I spot what I could think is an interesting trend, because they do things that I wouldn't do normally. And then I explore. And so, I would say, I already had a fairly playful nature as a child, and then as an adult, never to lose that, because that's essentially how you can continue exploring. And I guess, but I don't have a thing that I would change, right? Like, I think I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if I wasn't doing what I was doing earlier, right? And I think I think I will close with this maybe, that the parallels of when we were building the internet-related businesses and gaming businesses then is actually similar to blockchain today. Paradigms have changed a little bit, but it's the same. It's building communities, strong products, and ultimately, I think most of us are really here to try to build a different and better kind of future. And the one thing that I love about sort of bringing finance into gaming is that it's finally a real way in which we could teach children about finance, right? I've always felt a problem about the fact that most people learn about finance when they go to college and are generally in debt. Once they get their student debt, they're like, oh wait, I have interest to pay. What is interest, right? And then they pitch you these credit cards, which I think is downright criminal, for like 20 or 30% APR, and nobody knows what that is because it just feels like cash up front, right? I mean, now they're trying, regulating it or whatever, but that is one of the issues because, and I grew up in Europe, and frankly, we were not taught about money at a young age because money is kind of a dirty thing. You don't talk about that, right? It's just, but actually you must, right? And when I look at my kids, you can teach them economics and value at 8 or 9 or 10, no problem, because they understand what it broadly means and they can think about that. And games is that medium of learning, actually, right? And if you can actually start really making money or learning and making mistakes as well in relatively small amounts of money, then it'll be better in the future. So I actually really think that sort of introducing finance, real finance, into games is the big fintech revolution. Because if you can get all of our children to walk out after a couple of years of playing games, managing financial products, I think things will be very different for all of us.
I'm going to have a hard time finding a highlight from this video, as always, with Yacht. He definitely had a lot of quotes, that being one of them. I think financial education is something like around the whole world. It's not specific to Europe. I don't know about Asia, but it's definitely a problem in the US. So Yacht, again, great episode. I love what you're bringing to the NFT space and crypto space in general. You guys are really killing it with Animoca Brands, and I just can't wait to see you kind of lead this industry. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to check out Layer 1 on all the audio and video platforms listed in the description. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next week.